My father didn't even look me in the eye as he blocked the entrance to the Lake Tahoe estate. The wind was biting 10 degrees below zero, but his words were colder. He shoved a crumpled plastic bag into my chest. Inside was a cheap, black polyester catering uniform and a stained apron. Elena's family is inside, he said, checking his watch. They are elevated people. We can't have your desperate single girl energy ruining the aesthetic at the main table. Use the service entrance. And Savannah? The steaks need to be medium rare. Don't embarrass me. I stood there holding that cheap polyester apron while my own money sat in his fridge. Tell me in the comments. What is the most disrespectful thing a family member has ever asked you to do for the sake of peace? I want to read them all. I walked through the service entrance, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind me, sealing out the cold and the dignity I had left. The kitchen was massive, gleaming with stainless steel and marble. A cold, sterile monument to my mother who had bought this estate 3 years before she died. Now it was just Richard's stage. My name is Savannah and I am 28 years old. I run a high-end event planning firm in San Francisco. I manage budgets in the millions and egos the size of small countries. But the moment I stepped onto this property, my resume evaporated. Here I wasn't as if I was the help. I started unpacking the crates of food I had purchased. Tomahawk steaks, truffle butter, vintage Cabernet. $8,500 charged to my personal card because Richard had claimed his liquidity was tied up in the engagement ring. I was arranging the hors d'oeuvres when the swinging door flew open. Aunt Monica marched in. She didn't say hello. She scanned the counter looking for a flaw. You're late starting the prep, she snapped. Elena's parents are already judging the decor. We need this to go smoothly, Savannah. Your father is under enough stress. I paid for the steak, Monica, I said, my knife hitting the cutting board with a sharp thud. And he raised you alone, she fired back, playing her favorite card. He sacrificed everything for you after your mother passed. The least you can do is ensure he's happy today. Don't be so transactional. Transactional. The word hung in the air, heavy and ironic. For years I had asked myself why I did it. Why I wrote the checks, why I showed up, why I let them speak to me like I was an inconvenience they were forced to tolerate. I used to think it was because I was kind. But standing there, slicing lemons for a party I was banned from attending, I finally understood the architecture of my own obedience. It's a psychological trap called normalized cruelty. When you grow up in a house where affection is a currency, you don't learn to love. You learn to pay rent. Richard hadn't raised a daughter. He had trained a staff member. Every time he withheld praise until I performed a task, every time he sighed with disappointment until I opened my wallet, he was conditioning me. He taught me that my value wasn't innate. It was something I had to lease month by month with labor and compliance. They normalize the pain so slowly that you don't realize you're bleeding until you're anemic. I wasn't here because I was a good person. I was here because I was an addict and his approval was the drug I had been chasing since I was 6 years old. Monica watched me, waiting for me to apologize, to shrink, to promise I'd try harder. Instead, I picked up the black polyester apron. I tied the strings around my waist, pulling them tight. A shift happened in my chest. It was a cold, mechanical click like a lock snapping shut. If they wanted me to be the help, I would be the help. But they forgot one thing about hiring a professional. The help expects to get paid. And if the client violates the contract, the help has the right to walk off the job. I'll have the appetizers out in 10 minutes, I said, my voice flat. Monica nodded, satisfied that she had put me back in my box. She turned and left. She didn't see the look on my face. She didn't know that she hadn't just spoken to her niece. She had just spoken to a contractor who was about to audit the account. The guests arrived in a fleet of black SUVs, stepping out into the snow in fur coats and Italian leather boots. They were Elena's people, old money, new money, and the kind of people who didn't look at the staff. I circulated through the grand foyer with a silver tray of champagne, my head down, making myself invisible. It was a skill I had perfected over 20 years. I watched Richard hold court by the fireplace. He looked the part of the benevolent patriarch, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing with a crystal glass. He was telling a story about sourcing the vintage Cabernet I had driven 4 hours to find. I had it flown in, he lied, his voice booming with false modesty. Nothing but the best for Elena. You know me, I don't cut corners. I gripped the edge of the tray until my knuckles turned white. He wasn't just taking credit for the wine. He was taking credit for my taste, my effort, and my money. Then Elena drifted over. She was elegant, draped in cashmere with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked at Richard, then glanced around the room. Richard, darling, I thought you said your daughter was coming? I was hoping to meet her. The room went quiet. I froze near the drapes. This was it. The moment he would acknowledge me. Richard laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound. He gestured toward me with his glass, not beckoning me over, but pointing at me like I was a piece of furniture that needed dusting. "Oh, that's her," he said loud enough for half the room to hear. "She's helping out today. Poor thing is struggling a bit with her little party planning business in the city. I told her she could work off some debt by handling the service. We try to help family where we can, right?" The guests chuckled. A ripple of polite, pitying laughter. Elena looked at me, her expression shifting from curiosity to mild distaste. "Oh," she said. "That's very generous of you, Richard." I stood there, paralyzed in my black uniform. He hadn't just insulted me. He had erased me. He had taken my career, my award-winning six-figure career, and reduced it to a charity case. He had turned his exploitation of me into a virtue signal for his new friends. I didn't drop the tray. I didn't scream. I simply turned around and walked back into the kitchen. The humiliation wasn't hot anymore. It had turned into something else. It was cold. It was absolute. And it was final. I was in the kitchen staring at the wall when the swinging door banged open. Richard stormed in. The benevolent patriarch mask was gone. His face was red, his eyes narrowed. "Pick up the pace, Savannah," he hissed. "People are waiting for the second course. And stop sulking in the corner. It looks unprofessional." He didn't notice I was shaking. He didn't care. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. He slapped it onto the stainless steel counter. "And take care of this," he commanded. "The propane company called. The tank is at 10%. They need payment before they'll dispatch the emergency truck tonight. It's going to be 20 below zero. Elena likes it warm." I looked at the bill. It was for the emergency refill. Another $1,200. "You want me to pay for the heat?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Consider it your contribution," he said, turning back toward the door. "Since you're not bringing a gift." He walked out. The door swung shut, settling into a rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud crack. It was a silent, clean break. The tether that had bound me to him for 28 years. The guilt, the hope, the desperate need to be good enough. Just dissolved. I looked at the propane bill. Then I looked at the industrial refrigerator where $5,000 of my food was waiting to be plated. I picked up my phone. I dialed the gas company. "This is the resident at 4400 Lakeview," I said. My voice was steady. "I'm calling to cancel the emergency delivery. Sure. We won't be needing it." I hung up. Then I grabbed a marker and a sheet of heavy cardstock from my planning kit. I wrote in bold block letters. "Invoice catering services. $8,500 logistics and labor. $2,500 past due balance. $4,000 total due upon receipt. $15,000. I taped it to the refrigerator door at eye level. Beneath the total, I added a single line. "Services suspended for non-payment." I took off the apron. I folded it neatly on the counter. I wasn't the help anymore. I was the collection agency. And I was closing the account. I walked out into the blizzard. The cold hit me like a slap, minus 20 degrees and dropping, but for the first time all day I didn't flinch. I climbed into the cab of my truck, a heavy-duty Ford, the first used for event logistics, and started the engine. I threw it into reverse. The backup alarm beeped, a sharp, rhythmic warning that was swallowed by the wind. I backed the truck right up to the service ramp, the tires crunching over the fresh powder. I didn't rush. Panic is for people who are stealing. I wasn't stealing. I was recovering assets from a non-paying client. I moved with the cold efficiency of a repo man. I went back inside. The kitchen was empty. Through the swinging door, I could hear the muffled roar of the party. Laughter, clinking glasses, Richard's voice booming over the crowd. They were warm. They were fed. They had no idea that the supply chain had just been cut. I started loading. First the wine. 3 cases of the vintage Cabernet Richard had bragged about. I stacked them on the dolly and wheeled them out. Loaded. Next the proteins. The tomahawk steaks were still in their thermal crates, thawing on the counter. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the crates. $3,000 of prime beef. Loaded. Then the truffles, the caviar, the artisanal cheeses, the linens I had hand-selected to match Elena's eyes. I stripped the prep stations. I cleared the walk-in fridge. I took the silver serving platters that belonged to my company. Took exactly 12 minutes. When I was finished, the kitchen wasn't just empty. It was sterile. The stainless steel counters gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting nothing. No food. No warmth. No daughter. Just the invoice taped to the refrigerator, white and stark against the steel. Services suspended. I took one last look. This kitchen had been the site of so many holidays where I had worked myself into exhaustion trying to earn a seat at the table. I realized now that the table didn't matter. The only power I ever had was the ability to walk away from it. I walked out the service door and locked it behind me. I climbed into the truck and pulled away. The tires gripped the ice and the heavy vehicle lurched forward, carrying $15,000 of inventory back down the mountain. The drive was treacherous. The snow was falling in thick white sheets, blinding the windshield wipers. But as I navigated the winding roads away from the estate, I felt a physical release in my chest. My shoulders dropped. The knot in my stomach uncoiled. I canceled the emergency propane delivery just before 6. That left the estate with barely 2 hours of heat before the boiler shut down and the stone and glass house turned into an icebox in the middle of the blizzard. This wasn't cruelty, it was accounting. He had taken warmth from me my entire life. Now he would feel winter for himself. I drove to Truckee, checked into a cheap motel, locked the door like I expected war, and finally looked at my phone. 73 missed calls, 40 texts. I blocked both numbers and exhaled for the first time in decades. Then the room exploded in blue light. Police. 2 squad cars. Richard smiling in the snow. He'd reported me for felony theft, claiming I stole jewelry and heirlooms. He played the grieving father perfectly, offering me a deal. Return, finish the dinner, and he wouldn't press charges. Jail or servitude. I told the officers to search the truck. They found only food and linens. Everything legally purchased by me. I showed the receipts. The theft vanished. The false report remained. Then I handed over the trust deed. The house was mine. His life estate had a clause. Hosting an engagement for a romantic partner terminated his rights immediately. He had done exactly that. Tonight. For the first time he wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at his landlord. I asked the police to remove him for trespassing. They gave him 20 minutes to pack. The propane ran out shortly after. The party froze. The guests fled. The engagement collapsed by morning. 6 months later I sold the estate, started my own firm, and built a life with contracts instead of guilt. When his number texted again I felt nothing. I used to think family meant burning yourself to keep them warm. Now I know, if they love you they bring their own coat.